What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Got another Piers Morgan debate coming in, and we're discussing the Ukraine-Russian, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Ukrainian-Russian war, whatever the hell you want to call it, their illegal invasion, if you will. Now, we just had some good news break just a little bit earlier this afternoon, I believe, or at least that's when I saw the news headline. I'll put it that way. It's from today, but I believe Caroline Leavitt spoke yesterday on this. She said they believe that they're getting close to an end, to a ceasefire. This is very, very good news. This was one of Trump's campaign promises, and he needs to pull through on that, y'all. So I just wanted to get that out of there, get that out of the way before we get into this discussion, because I've never seen a debate where so many people get so many different things wrong, and I disagree with everybody. Like, these people's takes on this is just, they're just all over the damn place, right? Like, I almost totally disagree with Watch Ahead, which he's coming in on this one. We got Dan Crenshaw, who's a neocon, and yeah, I wish he would have never been re-elected back into Congress. This guy, we need to get rid of politicians like him. He is part of the problem, not part of the solution. But it's just funny. We got Glenn Greenwald as well. But before we get into that right quick, I need you guys to do me a giant favor. Y'all know what it is. Smash that like button for me. I sure would appreciate that. That would be a great help to me, and I need y'all's help. So y'all subscribe if y'all new around here. I cover news. We get into media manipulation. That's what I love to break down, because we're being heavily manipulated by the corporate press on a constant basis. And, knowing these things, having that knowledge that you're being manipulated, and having the ability to be able to see these things and have them pointed out to you so you can see them yourself, so you know when you're being manipulated, is the best way to fight against the lies of the corporate press, because they love to lie by omission. They love to skirt around the facts. They'll give you a little bit of facts, but then try to push you in this direction by using qualifiers and all this other stuff. So, but y'all subscribe, because that's what I do on a normal basis, Monday through Friday. And, well, Saturday and Sunday as well, because I make 2 videos every day, and I only make about 2 debate videos per week. So y'all subscribe to the channel. Stay up to date with all that stuff. Y'all share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. But without any further ado, let's get into it, y'all.
He clarified, he said, to be clear, when it comes to the actual negotiations over resolving the war, of course, Ukraine will be at the table. What they've had in Saudi is the first time that the Russians and the Americans have got together, and actually Ukraine was one of many things that they talked about. So,
I mean, we talk to Ukraine every single day. We have people there with them every single day.
I just think we should save our fury about whether Ukraine get included or not for when they actually get excluded.
Can I just insert a little bit of realism into the conversation?
Yes.
Because I know Dan started off by saying, "Oh, Russia's this crappy little second-rate power. We have to flatter them and make them think they matter, but they really don't. They're really weak." It's always a pretty weird contradiction to simultaneously say that and then at the same time warn that Russia's going to start invading Western Europe, this crappy little second-rate power. But the reality is, this is the reality whether you like it or not, Russia has fought a war now for 3 years against unified NATO and the United States, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars and highly sophisticated weapons into Ukraine, and the front line continues to move westward, not eastward, where the Russians are gaining more and more territory. More and more Ukrainians are being killed. There are fewer Ukrainian men left in that country who want to fight. They're being forcibly dragged in there and used as cannon fodder, or they're fleeing and risking their lives to do it. The reality is Russia is winning the war or has won the war. And you can say, oh, you must be a Kremlin agent to say that.
Well, you just got to know nothing about military information or tactics. That's what you have to do to say that. You just have to know nothing. So the idea that is clearly what you do.
Yeah, well,
you've got so many facts wrong. It's hard to know where to even start.
You can. You think Ukraine is winning the war? In which direction is the front line moved, Dan? Has it moved westward or eastward?
It depends on where you're looking at. It depends on where you're looking at. I hate to break it to you, but it depends on where you're looking at. And the ratios of Russian deaths to Ukrainian deaths, it's like 4-1. You just don't know what you're talking about.
Tens of thousands
You've never fought anything.
Men. You have
you don't
no
know
idea
anything
what
about
you're
the
talking
military.
about. I fought a lot of things. I fought a lot of things.
Oh, you fought a lot of things?
Just because you were in the military doesn't make you an expert. I'm sorry to say that Donald Trump
I don't need to be an expert. I just know basic facts, and I have all the briefings on it. I don't think you do.
clearly Russia's winning the war. The Ukrainians don't even want to go and fight this war any longer. They're fleeing the country.
It's a war of attrition with a stalemate. That's what we're looking at right now. That's the most honest way to look at it.
I'm sorry to say, one of the things that I know that you don't actually have to go join the military to understand is that Russia is many, many, many times larger than Ukraine. And that's the reason why the most prescient geopolitical experts, people have been on this show, I've interviewed them many times, people like John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs and Stephen Wald, all said since 2022, Ukraine will inevitably lose this war and Russia will win it. And I'll tell you why. This is the one point I want to make. When President Obama was on his way out of office in 2016, Jeffrey Goldberg interviewed him for a cover story on the Obama foreign policy doctrine. And he criticized Obama for not standing up to Russia in Syria and in Ukraine. And what Obama said was, the reality is Ukraine is and always has been and always will be a vital interest to Russia because it's right on the other side of their border, and it has never been and never will be a vital interest to the United States. So the idea that we're going to confront Russia or go to war with Russia over who governs various provinces in eastern Ukraine is absolute madness.
All right,
and President Obama was absolutely right, and President Trump thinks that too.
All right, yes,
all right,
quickly,
so
this is not worth dealing with.
Yeah, two things real quick. Going back to the conversation you and Dan were having, I will say this. Right now, Ukrainians, Zelensky and Europe feel like they're left out. That's number one. That's how they feel, what's happening right now with Russia and US. Secondly, I'm not going to be a cheerleader here for Russia and say they're winning a war. Ukrainians, having talked to them, having talked to the people who are resisting, I will tell you this. I will tell the world right now. Ukrainians, to the last man, to the last elder, to the last kid, to the last woman, will fight. They will fight to the end for their independence.
Well, actually, as you said that,
they're being dragged there. They're being dragged there involuntarily.
Well, hang on.
And they're all
hang on, guys. Let me just read. I want to read you some breaking news.
He's sprinkling in. Glenn is sprinkling in some truth about the nature of the war with some facts that are just incorrect. And so
all right, I'm going to bring you
lying to.
I'm going to bring Dan in, and then I'll let others respond. Let me just read what the Ukraine foreign minister just said. The Ukrainian people and their President Zelensky refuse to give in to Putin's pressure. Nobody can force Ukraine to give up. We will defend our right to exist.
Okay, so there's so many different things wrong with all of this. Okay, so let's get watch ahead out of the way right quick. This guy, like every time he comes on, he's just so wrong about so many things, right? Like to say that Russia's winning the war is cheerleading for Russia is absurd on its face. That's just a ridiculous way to look at things, right? But, you know, I can see the argument, right? Dan is right on this. Glenn Greenwald is wrong because if you look, okay, I'm going to scroll through a couple of control lines right there. Okay, so the first one I put up, that is the control lines as of August 2022, right? So then let's move to, I think that's January 2024. Okay, y'all see that pretty good. Now, let's put up the current as of January 2025. Now, do you notice something strange with all three of those maps? Yes, all three of those maps look exactly the same. The lines of control have gone nowhere. This is where Dan is correct. They're fighting to a stalemate. However, if you understand what's going on with this war, Glenn Greenwald is correct, but for the wrong reasons. He's saying that Russia has won the war already, which that's what I agree with that. They have won the war, as a matter of fact. They wanted that little land bridge there to Crimea. That's all he wanted, right? Dan Crenshaw is one of these proponents of the people that think that, oh, well, if we allow for this, if we capitulate to Russia, that's going to embolden Russia to just roll into Poland and roll into Eastern Europe and all this other stuff. It's like, no, I don't think so. Their army at this point could not roll over all of Ukraine if they wanted to. Right? They've been struggling to do that. So they either can do it, and they've just been holding back because they want that little land bridge right there, or they can't do it, right? Both of those can't be true at the same time, right? So if they can do it and they just want this land bridge, that goes to show, that points in a direction that he has no ambitions to go into Poland, no ambitions to go into Europe, none of those ambitions whatsoever. Dan Crenshaw talks a little bit later in this thing about, well, just listen to Russia says, blah, 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 blah. He wants us to expand their sphere. That doesn't mean conquest, by the way. That means their sphere of influence, their soft power influence. They lost the soft power battle in Ukraine. That was totally trade. that soft power battle was going on with trade, right? Russia didn't want to open up to the European markets because that would flood Russia with European goods, cheap European goods, putting Russia businesses out of business, as a matter of fact. And they can't be having that. Putin also wanted that land bridge to Crimea. Why? Because they have a military base down there in Crimea. So this is just all absurd. And everybody's got their little points that they get right. But their premise on most of this is just totally wrong, in my opinion, right? That's just what I believe from what I've seen, from what I've heard, from what I know about what's actually going on, right? You can't believe that Russia is going to roll into Eastern Europe. That is absurd on its face, right? If Putin wanted to reunify the old Soviet Union, why has he waited so long? Like, he's been in power since, what, 2000 when he got elected? Why did he wait 22 years to do so? And why is he moving so slowly? I don't think he'll ever get there at this point. So that's an absurd argument on its face, right? It's my belief that he just wanted that land bridge to Crimea. Why? Because Ukraine was cutting off access from water, supplies, and everything to Crimea, and Russia did not have any land access to that port. And that's what they wanted. That's what I personally believe. But hey, it is what it is. Let's keep going.
Consistent with what they've been saying. Look, I mean, I'll agree with Glenn on one thing. Look, if you without Western support, yes, Russia would eventually beat Ukraine. Now, I think people forget it on the geopolitical strategies of this. This, for America, even for Europeans, this isn't so much about Ukraine. It's about Russia. And yes, I'd hate to break it to you, but it's not a contradiction to say that they are a second-rate power, but they would also invade Baltic states. That has long been part of Putin's grander plan for greater Russia. And they can do it if Europe and the United States lets them. Yes, they can do it to a small state if they let them. This is kind of how World War II happened, if I may remind everyone. There is a domino effect here. And there is grander purpose by Putin, and he said you just have to listen to what he says. You don't have to take my word for it. To expand their sphere. They can say that they feel under threat by NATO. They're full of crap. We know for a fact they've never felt threatened by NATO, only to the extent that they don't like NATO because it means they can't conquer other countries and take their stuff. Now, here's the biggest important part about geostrategic implications for the United States. This is why it's about Russia, not Ukraine. When you allow dictators to just conquer other countries and take their stuff, you have reverted us to a pre-World War II history. That's problematic. That was a time in history, and it lasted for thousands of years, when we didn't have a global economy. Life sucked. There was tens of millions dead in wars because it was normalized for dictators to invade others if they wanted to take their stuff. And for the last 80 years, America has led an order where we don't allow that. That's actually what's at stake for American interests. It's American deterrence for the next 50 years. Now, I'm with you. You have to talk to Russia. You have to end this somehow. The war of attrition cannot continue. I think we agree there. You have some weird facts about what's going on the battlefield that I think are just untrue, but we agree mainly on what needs to happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, so there it is. There's that talking point I was talking about, right? That makes absolutely no sense. I wish Dan Crenshaw would just come out and say it. Like, I'm a neocon who wants to fund the military-industrial complex and keep the citizens of the United States in fear and the citizens of Europe in fear that Russia is always this looming threat in the background that, oh, if we allow them, if we don't push this much money into our military-industrial complex and put all this money all over the place and feed these rich corporations that actually make the weapons, that make the tanks, that make the jet planes, that make all this stuff, if we don't keep them happy and fat and greedy, then yeah, Russia's going to invade you and take you over because he's a big bad bully, right? Russia, okay, Putin might just very well be, and I totally agree with this take, that he's an evil dictator, right? He wants power, but you know, he's not an idiot, regardless of what you might think about that, right? And you could say, oh, well, you're just being a cheerleader for Russia. Go ahead and say that if you want to, but that makes absolutely no sense, simply because of the fact that I look at Putin as he's an evil guy, right? Because he invaded Ukraine for apparently no good reason. Right? There's no good reason for an invasion unless you're getting invaded yourself, and then that's just self-defense at that point. That's not really an invasion. However, Putin might be an evil guy, but he's not an idiot. You don't become the leader of a great nation or a big nation. He's not really a great nation, I wouldn't say that much, but you don't become the leader of a large country by being stupid, right? He understands that if he pushes the buttons of NATO, if he actually rolls into NATO territory, then it's going to be all-out war. He absolutely knows exactly what Article 5 means for Russia. It will mean the destruction of their economy, it will mean the fall of Moscow, and it will mean that he will spend the rest of his life rotting in some international criminal court prison somewhere, right? That's exactly what that means. And Putin absolutely knows this. He doesn't want to push NATO to full-scale war. That is absurd on its face that somebody would think that he would want to do that. Why would he want the destruction of his own country? Now you might think, well, he's got nukes. Yeah, so do we. Once again, that road leads to all-out destruction. Sure, the West might get destroyed as well, but at the same time, his own country would get destroyed. And nobody with any amount of sense in their brain wants to rule over the ashes of a destroyed nation. Yes, let's keep going.
Ukrainian will say that no matter what, we will be independent. We will fight for our independence no matter what happens.
The Ukrainians have every right to fight. The Ukrainians have every right to fight.
I'm sorry, Glenn, 1 second.
Nobody
I'd like to
denies
speak.
that.
Just give me a second. Just give me a second. 1 second. And also, as you know, since you're so brilliant and you know a lot about Russia and Putin believes that EU, NATO, European allies, United States is the enemy. You know that Putin's goal has always been to recreate the USSR. He says the greatest defeat, the greatest tragedy that he witnessed in his lifetime was the collapse of the USSR, and he wants to make Russia great again. So it's not just Ukraine. Ukraine is just a chess piece for Putin's ambitions to regain control, to get more territory, to make Russia great again. And we have a chance right here, as no matter how flawed we are flawed. I agree with you. The hypocrisy, the flaws, yes. But nonetheless, a post-World War II order that at the very least, in some way, promotes democracy. I hope free and fair elections. I hope in some way liberalism says enough. We're going to stand up to dictators, a brutal war criminal, which is Putin, who is against American interests, against European interests. And we're going to make sure you don't do this to any other country. It stops right here at Ukraine. But you say roll over for Putin. I wonder why.
I mean, I would say on the dictator point.
But probably because I'm a Kremlin agent. Probably because I'm a paid agent of the Kremlin, which is what you're implying. The reason I think the Ukrainians have the right to fight for as long. The reason the Ukrainians have the right to fight all they want. The question is whether or not the United States is duty bound and whether American workers are duty bound to finance that war. And Americans made very clear in this election,
but Glenn, just to jump in
as well, that they don't want to.
Just to jump in, Glenn, on that point, though, about your apparent inconsistency, what is the difference in your head between the situation in Gaza and the situation in Ukraine?
I think the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation. I think the Ukrainians have the right to fight the Russians as well. I don't have any inconsistencies at all. I'm not advocating that the United States arm the people of Gaza to fight against the Israeli occupation, just like I'm not advocating that the United States arm the people of Ukraine.
So should Israel be allowed to keep land in Gaza then?
No, but they're going to, because it's the reality. Even though I don't like it, it's the reality that the Israelis are my point is, what is the difference? If you think that they should not be allowed to keep land in Gaza, having attacked it, but you think that Russia, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but do you think that Russia should be allowed to keep the land they've taken to go with the land they took in Crimea? I mean, do you think they should be allowed to? No, I don't think it's right. But I recognize the reality that the Israeli Jews are not going anywhere. They're going to stay in Israel. They're going to end up annexing the West Bank. Miriam Adelson paid for that to make sure. And they're going to continue to do whatever they want in Gaza and Syria and Lebanon, occupying the parts of those countries they're occupying. That's just the reality, even though I don't think they should. The reality is that Russia is a much stronger country than Ukraine and is going to end up protecting the ethnic Russian population in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, whether we like it or not. And this is something the U.S. government has known for many years. As I just referenced, that Bill Burns memo and a lot of other documents that ended up emerging showed that the U.S. government knew that.
The problem with Glenn, it's not so much that he's inconsistent. I think he fundamentally disagrees or doesn't understand what I laid out about the geopolitics of the last 80 years. That's one problem. Second problem is, I think if Glenn's buddy was getting his butt kicked at the local bar, he would let him because he would say, well, I have no chance of winning, so forget it. I mean, that's another problem. That's a moral and ethical issue, and you don't have to care about that. But I think on the geopolitical issue of the world order for the last 80 years that America has largely benefited from, massively, actually, you have to take that into account when you deal with global players that want to engage in the first global, like, war of conquest since World War II. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we all agree that Wajahat Ali is a parody of a progressive political commentator? Like, smash the like button, by the way, if you think Wajahat is just a parody. He's satirical, if you will. Just his entire existence, everything he says just makes absolutely no sense. But I threw this clip in there because I love how Dan Crenshaw uses one of my analogies on this, right? Like, I used to always say this back when I was covering the news about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? When you see, this is what normal people do. Now, Dan Crenshaw just showed his true colors right there, right? Normal people, when you see somebody fighting, you go and break that fight up, or you call the police and have the police come and break that fight up. He says, this is what Dan Crenshaw thinks, that when you see a friend fighting with somebody, regardless of who started it, right? So the other guy started it. It doesn't matter who starts it. You go and you help your friend, regardless. Well, you know, that analogy isn't really applicable to this situation. Ukraine is not the friend of the United States. We're not buddies, okay? France would be one of our buddies, right? The UK would be one of our buddies. Poland, one of our buddies. Ukraine, not so much. That's an acquaintance of somebody else, right? We've had trade negotiations with them before, and ow, that kind of hurt. I don't know what the hell happened just now, but that kind of hurt. We've had trade negotiations with Ukraine, but, you know, as far as that, that's about it. We took the nukes out of Ukraine, and, you know, that kind of speaks to something. Most people do not go and see two people fighting and go and jump in and start helping. That's not what you're supposed to do. Sure, an irresponsible young adolescent, teenager, somebody in their early 20s, sure, they might do that, but that's hot-headed, and, you know, you're not thinking too far in front of what's right in front of you, because, you know, you get arrested and you go to jail for bar fights, for crying out loud. All right, so that's not thinking properly. That's not thinking holistically about everything that's going on. Now, getting to what's going to happen with the land that Russia has taken, right? The annexed land, if you will, because at this point it's kind of become annexed, right? I think that needs to be given back to the Ukrainian people with concessions, right? It's absolutely clear to me that Russia wants that land bridge. They want access to Crimea. So I think some concessions need to be made here. You know, Russia agrees to pull the troops, pull everybody out, but have some sort of access. I'm sure there's some highway running from Russia to Crimea. Let Russia have access to that highway, some kind of trade corridor, if you will. We'll call it that. A trade corridor, so they can have access to Crimea. I think that will satisfy everybody. You know, I was reading the news article about the ceasefire earlier, and Caroline Leavitt was saying in this news article that, you know, Donald Trump is trying to negotiate some mineral resources out of this deal, which, leave it to Donald Trump to do that, right? Like, in the middle of some ceasefire negotiations, he's going to bring up, hey, you think we could get 50% of the profits from all these resources, you know, all the like minerals and oil and gas and all this other stuff, which to me, I think is a good idea, because how much money we've actually given to Ukraine. You know, Zelensky claims it's only been $70 billion, but we've allocated $200 billion. As a matter of fact, that's just the United States. Now, I understand a lot of that did go to our own military-industrial complex, and that's why I can't stand that at all, because we're replenishing our bullets or whatever. You know, we could do that regardless. We don't need to continually fund a war in Ukraine to replenish our stockpiles of bullets and missiles, in my opinion. But I think, you know, negotiations outside, you know, should take precedence over everything else. Peace should take precedence over everything else. We can work out these ideas through negotiating. We don't have to go to war with anybody. The United States does not. Now, I understand some smaller nations, and, it's always arguments over land or resources or something like that. And I just don't understand why these places can't negotiate some sort of why it always has to result in war at this point. Because the people that are actually negotiating all of these things, or the people that actually decide to go to war, don't have to fight in those wars. That's why I love the provision of anybody in Congress that votes for going to war should be forced to volunteer for the front lines on that war. That would pretty much be assured that we don't ever go to war again. And I love that idea, but you probably never get Congress to agree on that. But we don't just talk about Russia and Ukraine in this thing. We kind of dip our toes a little bit into what Elon Musk is doing. So let's check that clip out.
And that's how it should be.
Dan, how would you, be honest, how would you have felt if it was a Democrat administration and they brought in, say, Mark Zuckerberg in his previous incarnation as a liberal, and he was doing what Elon Musk is doing? Would you feel uncomfortable about it?
I was very uncomfortable when the last Democrat administration was working with social media companies to censor people online.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, but that's also apples and oranges.
The point I'm making is,
you're talking about firing federal employees to work for the federal government.
Having a multi-billionaire tech bro in there with any administration, is it right?
A lot of their cabinet secretaries are people who are just really rich people who donated to their campaign. This is nothing new. And look, and if somebody has a history of going into organizations and making them more efficient, Elon Musk does have that history. It remains to be seen whether it works with the bureaucracy. That's why I didn't know what they were going to do. I have been impressed with the niche they found, which is purely data analytics. Now they need to interpret that data correctly and then figure out what policy measures take place after that. They're not in charge of the policy measures, and I think that's what a lot of left-wing media gets wrong. If somebody gets fired at DOE, talk to the Secretary of Energy. On the FAA thing. I mean, Sean Duffy, he's the Secretary of Transportation, just put out. Look, everybody, calm down. The FAA has 45,000 employees. They fired about 400, all of which were on probationary periods, less than a year at the FAA. Everybody calm down. Planes are going down in a lot of places, but actually, if you start looking at a map, it's not in America. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not because of DOGE and the FAA. That's just, look, if you can make a causal connection between that employee being fired and a plane going down, be my guest, but you can't.
Okay.
I can. I'm right here at DCA, right here, 20 minutes away from me, right? There was no head of FAA because Elon Musk fired the FAA chief. There was no head of TSA.
So you think that ground controllers all of a sudden have no idea what to do? Is that what you think? You think pilots all of a sudden lose their training because there's no head of the FAA? I bet you. I'll bet you right now, most pilots don't even know who the head of the FAA is.
Just let me finish. There was a temporary freeze on FAA air controllers and in DCA, where the plane collided, where it was the most dangerous airplane casualty on the ground in 16 years, where nearly 70 people died. There was one person manning 2 air controllers. That's a job of 2 people.
We know that was pilot error.
Right now, the people in the FAA, right now in the FAA, they're saying there are 5 people doing the job of 14 people. And Axios just did a poll where Americans are terrified of flying. It's terrible for American business, terrible for American flyers, and we've never seen this many crashes and collisions domestically ever in the first month of any presidency, and it coincides with Elon Musk and DOGE. Elon Musk is unelected.
The FAA has 45,000 employees. I don't know what you're talking about. The 14 versus 5.
You should be worried as well.
And once again, Watch Hat just shows himself to be a complete parody of a progressive political commentator at this point, right? I don't think he's ever heard the term that, or understands that correlation is not causation, my guy. Like Dan said, Dan makes a really good point right here. Just because you fire the head of the FAA, he thinks all of a sudden these air traffic controllers have no idea what's going on, right? Right? They fired 400 employees from the FAA, none of which were air traffic controllers. As a matter of fact, they need to hire more. The Biden administration was on this crusade to hire nothing but minorities, right? Overlooking plenty of good candidates that would have made very good air traffic controllers, right? That problem that they had, everything is pointing to, that was pilot error. However, we did also have an air traffic controller problem. One guy was doing the job of, should have been 2 people, right? And what does that say? They weren't hiring enough people, right? But it wasn't the air traffic controller's fault necessarily, right? I'm sure that situation there is a little bit to blame, because if you have a second set of eyes, maybe they could have seen that helicopter flying straight toward that airplane and could have, got on the radio and said something. But considering they only had one guy, it's possible he didn't see that coming. There wasn't anything he could do about it, right? But there is no proof of this. That's just speculation right off the jump, because everything that we're seeing is pointing to pilot error at this point. But getting outside of that, Dan Crenshaw, right at the beginning of that clip, he has a chance to prove that he has some scruples, to show that he has some integrity, that he's not a scumbag, that he's not one of these neocon, just piece of crap congressmen that nobody likes anymore at this point, right? With talking about how he would have felt if it was Mark Zuckerberg that came in and is doing exactly what Elon Musk is doing. Now, I've made this argument several times. He had the perfect opportunity right there to give the correct answer. The answer he gives is whataboutism. Like, what? Are you serious? You're going to go to, the Biden administration having backdoor access to social media platforms instead of answering the question like you got a backbone, my guy? Right? The correct answer to that is yes, it would be great. I would have loved if the Biden administration would have brought Mark Zuckerberg or anybody in. It doesn't matter who it is. If they are doing what Elon Musk is doing, cleaning up the waste, exposing all of this nonsense that's going on, firing federal employees instead of expanding the federal government by 40%, we would have cheered for that, right? But he answers with this milquetoast whataboutery answer that makes absolutely no sense. Like, come on, my guy. And this is the problem with a lot of congressmen. This is why I always tell my people in my regular news videos that we need to pay attention to Congress, y'all. We need to know what these people are voting on, because they make the rules that we have to live by. And you have a say in who gets elected to represent you in Congress. Right? And if you have somebody like Dan Crenshaw representing you in Congress, that is just more of business as usual from the past 40, 50, 60 years. Spend money. Don't let the American people know what we're spending their money on. By God. Fund the military-industrial complex. Start wars all over the place. Try to make it look like, oh, well, they started it. We're just defending democracy over here. It's like, come on, shut up, get out of here. We need to get back to realism in this country. Get back to realistic fiscal responsibility in Congress, right? Accountability for the federal government. That's what we need. That's what we're getting. And it doesn't matter who brings that accountability as long as we get it. I don't understand this relentless pushback against what Elon Musk is doing, right? It shouldn't matter to anybody what Elon Musk or, who it is that's doing it. What should matter is that we're cleaning up the fraud and the waste and the abuse and the nonsense of this federal government that thinks that they can just take your money and do whatever the hell they want to do with it. They want to spend it on far left, gender ideologically driven nonsense all across the world. That's BS in my opinion. They can't do that. That's garbage. You want to do that in your own country? Do it in your own country. You want to do it in another country? Do it in another country with somebody else's funds. Go start a GoFundMe to go fund your stinking ridiculous programs all across the world if you want to do that. Don't do it on the taxpayer dime, knowing that most Americans don't agree with a lot of these programs. Some do, sure. And some are just fine with what's going on in the federal government. They could care less. They want to spread their seed all over the place, regardless if it burns this country to the freaking ground, because that's exactly what it's doing. We're spending money in such a vast deficit that eventually this country is going to implode. The economic market is going to collapse if we continue to do this, because eventually we're going to get to a point to where we can't pay our interest payments. And everybody knows what happens when you can't pay off your debts. You go bankrupt. When the country goes bankrupt, the economy is going to collapse. And I don't think anybody wants that. But Democrats, they're all about the here and now. What can we do right now to get what we want? Screw the future, right? This is why they don't have kids. They're not having kids, right? A lot of people that are being put in these positions to make these decisions to let's spend into oblivion right now, screw the future, don't have kids. Absolutely. Because if they did, if they cared about the future of this country, if they realized what this is going to do, they definitely would be a little bit more fiscally responsible. They would try to knock down the debt, right? At least not spend in a deficit. But currently, this trajectory that we're on, it's unsustainable, y'all. It really is. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you know what unsustainable means? That we're not going to be able to keep this up forever. Eventually, we're going to hit a wall. And when we do, nobody's going to like what happens at that point. Economic collapse is not very nice. We saw it happen to Russia, to the Soviet Union, and everything fell apart. Poverty was widespread, right? Once again, transferring wealth upwards at an even faster rate than during COVID. And it's just absurd, and I don't want to see that happen. I want to see this nation prosper, and I think that's what Trump believes, right? I might not agree with everything that he does, but at least you can see that he wants to try to make this country great again, right? Some people think, oh, well, he just does it for himself. Well, you know what I would say to you people that think that Donald Trump's just a selfish narcissist guy. He just wants to look good in front of other people. Everything he does is for himself. You know what? If it makes the country a better place to live in, more economically stable, more respected on the world stage, who cares why Donald Trump is doing it? If it's a net positive for this country, who cares if it makes himself feel better about what he does? Who cares if he's only doing it for himself? The motivation doesn't matter. It's the end result that matters, in my opinion. But I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section, because we've discussed a whole hell of a lot of topics. So y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. Y'all don't forget to smash that like button for me. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. I would greatly appreciate that. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.